In the previous video, we've talked about Leonardo da Vinci's early life and career while in Florence and Milan. So in this video, we're gonna continue with Leonardo's life journey during his second period in Florence, Milan, and more, where we can dive deeper into his futuristic inventions and achievements. More respectable figures would also stumble into his life and became his patrons. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Leonardo was back in Florence in the year 1500, and this time he was ready to re-establish himself as a painter. At the same time, Michelangelo and Raphael had also risen in fame in Florence, making them his rivals. During his time in Florence, he was provided with a workshop from the monks at the monastery of Santissima Annunziata, where Leonardo created the cartoon of the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne. Leonardo was also commissioned to produce a fresco, The Battle of Anghiari, for the Grand Council Hall of the Palazzi Signoria, but unfortunately it was left unfinished. Besides focusing on painting, his fascination with anatomy continued as he performed more body dissections in Florence. It was not just out of artistic interest, however, but it was more of scientific purpose to understand the human machine. One of the famous sketches he did was the detailed study of human heart, where he also hypothesized the function and action of the heart. Later in the year 1502, Leonardo briefly entered the service of Cesare Borgia, the notorious son of Pope Alexander VI, who became the commander of the papal army. Leonardo, who was already renowned for his science and engineering studies, acted as a military engineer and strategist for the commander. He worked on designing and improving fortifications as well as developing new weapons and engineering solutions. He also sketched some of the city plans and topographical maps, creating early aspects of modern cartography. After a year, Leonardo left Borgia's service, and later he was commissioned by a Florentine merchant to make a portrait of his wife Lisa Gherardini, which later on became the most recognized painting in art history, the Mona Lisa, which he initially left incomplete and finished some time later. In the year 1506, Leonardo was summoned by a French governor, Charles d'Amboise, to return to Milan and work under his service. At this time, Milan was ruled under France, and as the governor of the city, Charles wanted to fill his court with artists, engineers, and scientists, and Leonardo was all those things in one man. Charles gave Leonardo a very generous salary and a home to live. He was even honored with the title Painter and Engineer of the Duke, as well as King Louis XII of France. Some projects that Leonardo received were architectural work of a villa for Charles, creating a waterway to link Milan and Lake Como, and sketches for the church of Santa Maria alla Fontana. During this period in Milan, Leonardo created very little as a painter, as he focused more on his scientific activities. In his anatomy studies, he collaborated with renowned anatomist Marcantonio della Torre that led Leonardo to understand detailed reproduction of the human body and its organs, along with comparative anatomy and the whole field of physiology. Also, his manuscripts of this time filled with optical, geological, and botanical studies. He even created plans for his famous flying machine and also devised an early example of the machine gun and a large crossbow. Leonardo's time in Milan once again had to end in the year 1513 due to the expulsion of the French from Milan. With his patron defeated, Leonardo decided to go to Rome, where he was hoping to seek employment from the new Pope, Pope Leo X, aka Giovanni de' Medici, who was known for having refined taste in art. Leonardo was welcomed by the Pope's brother Giuliano de' Medici and offered him to live in the papal apartments with comfortable income from Vatican. But unfortunately, his time in Rome was depressing because no large commissions were given to him, and most of the important works were given to Raphael and Michelangelo, who seemed to be the Pope's favorite artists. With that, Leonardo kept a low profile while he worked on his own studies. His anatomy studies, however, had to come into a halt as the Pope forbade him to perform body dissection. Leonardo's health also began to deteriorate as he suffered several minor strokes, making it difficult for him to paint and draw with his usual skill. The only great achievement he had during this period was the completion of his last major painting, Saint John the Baptist. In the year 1516, his patron Giuliano de' Medici had passed away, and at the same time, Michelangelo and Raphael was the rising stars in Italy. Seeing that there was nothing left for him, Leonardo decided to accept the invitation from King Francis I of France to live in his court. He offered Leonardo the permanent title, the first painter, architect, and engineer to the king. The king even provided him a chateau to live as well as generous allowance, which would enable him to live in comfort to the end of his days. During this period, Leonardo suffered another health casualties that made his arm become paralyzed and he could no longer paint. He continued to work in other fields instead, like making plans and designs for royal palaces, organizing grand festivals for the king, and advising on engineering projects. Leonardo lived a peaceful life in France until his death on May 2, 1519, at the age of 67, and he was buried in the church of Saint Florentine in Amboise. Even though the greatest Renaissance man had gone, his legacy, however, continued to live on, as his notebooks and drawings were passed down through centuries, and they had inspired generations of artists, scientists, and inventors. Even today, his life and work continue to be studied and celebrated, making him one of the most iconic figures in history.